Greetings and thanks for tuning in. I'm Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and welcome to the third episode of the PLP Pathways Professional Development Series. I'd like to thank Orca Media for letting us film the show in their studio, and my co-hosts.
Hello, I'm Maura Kelly. I teach humanities at People's Academy Middle Level in Morrisville, Vermont.
In our last episode, we talked about goal setting, proficiencies, and parent communications. Today we'll continue that conversation and we'll report out on our student-led conferences and the next steps that we're taking to utilize the information gained from those meetings and how we plan on implementing that information into our course of study.
Before we get too far into today's show, we want to make sure you know how to stay connected to PLP Pathways. You can visit our site, follow us on Twitter, and keep tabs on the project through our blog. We'll show these again to you later at the end of the show.
Every month we also host a YouTube live event for Vermont educators. Our next YouTube webinar will be Thursday, November 17th at 3:30 p.m. And this pre-recorded segment that you're watching will lead to online discussion, collaboration, and planning among interested educators. Videos will be posted on the PLP Pathways YouTube channel, and we hope that you can join us for that rich discussion. So last week we completed our first round of student-led conferences, and because of our ongoing work with personal learning in Act 77, we felt that it was really important, more important than ever really, to keep parents informed and to send them a stream of information. And so we've emphasized in the past about the importance of setting up your calendar, and one of the things that we did this year is we set benchmarks for communications out to parents. So the first thing we did is at Open House, we started talking about our work with the 3 pillars of personalized learning. And the 3 pillars is a structure that allows us to talk about personalized learning, proficiency-based learning, and flexible pathways, all within the context of Act 77. So we sent out information about that, and we actually sent out a letter that discussed personal learning plans, proficiencies, and we also talked about flexible pathways. In conjunction with that, we were working with our students to develop their PLPs and get ready for the conferences. So some of the specific steps that we took, again, we did the open house communication, which was a letter that was sent out to parents in hard copy, but also electronically. We also sent them about 3 weeks later another letter indicating our expectations for the student-led conferences, some of the steps that they could take with their student at home to prepare for those, and then the outline of the conference. And then with the students, we ran through the script, and we did that a couple different times to get them used to the conference format and setting and the expectations. And then after the conferences, we actually sent out a survey to help parents, to collect information from the parents about how they felt the conferences were, the format, and what can be improved.
We did something very similar, and I think parent conferences can look very different depending on the schools. And so the way that we structure our student-led conferences is we go through the steps of having students setting the goals, working through the script, walking through a presentation, and they also talk about successes that they've had in academic classes. And when we have the actual conference, one of the things that we've really tried to think about creatively is how do we make the schedule fit for all families, and make sure that every family has the option to come in. And so we will actually schedule multiple families at one time, staggering them by 5 or 10 minutes. So a family will come in, I'll start them off, and the student, because they're really the facilitator, the focus is on them that day to be sharing the information with the parents. And then I'll move on to the next family, and then be able to circle back because there's that delay in the start times. And we give resources. One of the things that we do is we send resources to parents. Most of our parents have been doing student-led conferences for a few years, but just about their role at the conference, how they can best support their students. And we always end with a survey to try and facilitate further discussions between the students and the parents later when they're at home. And we do this through a Google form, so that we also have data from the meeting.
How are you, a couple questions, how are you making sure that the parents are filling out that data? One of the issues that I've had is we gave them the information at the conference and we haven't had a whole lot of return. We've also put it out electronically. Are there specific steps that you're taking to encourage parents to complete that feedback? And if so, what might those be?
So one of the things that we're doing with this Google form is it's also a student accountability piece. So each of the TAs, so I know within my TA, as of today, I still have 5 students that I need to follow up with. And so I've been talking with those students and reminding them, making sure that they have the resource. And then I had them come up with a plan for how they would successfully have this conference or fill out this survey. And then my next step is going to be calling the family. And if I'm finding, because there are those instances where you have one family and for whatever reason you're really struggling to meet them, right. I might help that student find another adult that they might want to share, either a grandparent or maybe a member of our school community to share with. But we are, keeping students, sort of trying to keep students accountable of this. We've toyed with the idea of having it be like a homework assignment, a homework grade. Right. But we haven't really decided yet.
That's interesting, though, that idea of going through the TAs, because that is an area. It's obvious that you consider that feedback so important that you're going through the TAs, and that's something I hadn't considered, which I might do, because the return, I think we had 40-some conferences, and the return, we're running less than 10% right now. So we have to get that, we have to figure out a way to get that input. Last year, we managed to get up to 91% return for parents who had attended the conferences, and I thought the feedback was really good and really important too. Mm-hmm. So that's great feedback. We're going to talk a little bit, or I'd like to talk a little bit about observations from my conferences this year. And there's a couple things that I noticed. One is that this year I've decided to set goals earlier in the trimester. And so we set goals right around the 2nd or 3rd week of school. And frankly, I thought that was a mistake. I think it's much wiser to spend time on identity activities and also developing relationships with the kids, because I know the kids so much better now after 8 to 9 weeks having them in my class, that I feel like we could do a much better job of setting goals. We also have worked on developing a common language that would make that goal setting a lot easier. One thing I thought that the kids were really doing a nice job of is tying their specific evidence to goals. And while it's still somewhat teacher-directed, I would suggest that kids are getting better at selecting evidence from across the curriculum that meets their goals and also demonstrates proficiency. So I thought that was an improvement. And then the last thing is just the importance of revising our goals and revisiting them. Mm-hmm. So after these great conversations, it became apparent that we need to go back and look at the goals, talk to the kids and say, all right, is this the best goal for you moving forward? How can we adjust this goal? How can we change how we're tracking it? Mm-hmm. And how can we identify good evidence to demonstrate your accomplishment of those goals? So overall, I thought the conferences went well. I'd like to see more time spent with the parents. Mm-hmm. It just feels a little bit too short. But on the whole, it was a very positive experience. And now for you, what are your future steps in terms of the conferences?
So one of the things that, similar kind of to what you were saying, is really thinking about what are the structures that we're going to be putting in place this year to make sure that students have regular routine opportunities to meet in with teacher advisors around their goals, but also to be, curating evidence and reflecting on their goals. Because I think that's really key to keeping the goals alive. The other thing that we're really thinking about is how do we keep families engaged and having conversations outside of school. We are thinking about ways to have students, filming conversations that they're having with their parents around questions, or maybe continuing to use Google Forms or other sort of pieces of technology. Because if the student really is being the driver, they can have those conversations anywhere. So thinking about how do we keep the conversations going outside of parent conferences.
One last idea is the issue of equity. You're hearing a lot about that in regards to all aspects of technology, but also equity with the conferences and making sure that all families are heard. Some families are a little bit easier to get into the school than others, and I just think it's really important for teachers and educators to be thinking about how they can be a welcoming or create a welcoming environment for all families. Mm-hmm. So that's important. So after conferences and the next round of goal setting, we're thinking as a team, where are we headed next? As I mentioned previously, our immediate goal is to have kids look at their the goals that they've set, look at the evidence, and decide whether or not that's accurate and that their goals and their evidence are matching and demonstrating the proficiencies that they've determined are going to be important to them. And I might add too that most of those goals are around transferable skills. Mm-hmm. So the next step too, and one of the reasons that I set goals earlier in the trimester, is that I really wanted to focus on principles and values and relationships moving forward. And the reason I'm doing that is I wanted to link those to some of our literature studies. Specifically, we're reading a book called Fever 1793 by Laurie Halls Anderson. And there's a central character in that book who is part of a small community, and that small community is impacted by disease. And we're going to look at that character through the lens of principles and values, through the lens of her relationships, and through the lens of the connection she has to the community. And we're going to hopefully help students make the connections between literature and life. And it should be an interesting way of engaging kids through this personalized learning. And that's new. That's something we haven't done before. I'm looking forward to it. But as I mentioned, I think setting goals early and waiting for the principles and values might not be the best way to go down the road. How about you?
I think for us, we've started thinking about, we do a negotiated curriculum unit. We started last year for the first time using a framework developed by Lindsay Hallman from the Edge Academy. And so our big focus right now is on students developing their projects and helping them set goals that are embedded within the project. And so we have opportunity time at the end of the day. And so that's really where our next big focus is around that work.
So, and just for the educators out there, I'm thinking about how do we move from the teacher-driven model to a student-driven, student-negotiated model. I'm hearing you say that you're doing it one unit at a time. Is that correct? And for those out there who struggle with this, I'm struggling with it too. How do you move from, do you do it by unit? Do you do it by year? Or, what are the structures? And I think that's something that we should probably be talking about as we move forward is, where does personal learning go? And I think where it goes is it ends up in the student negotiated curriculum. And it'd be great if we could continue to have examples of that and have discussions about that because it's important. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that we're really working on this year is trying to figure out how do we get it into the content areas? What does it look like once we arrive at a theme and trying to work within the constraints that we have within the school day, trying to make that work.
Yep, and those are great questions, and those are the type of questions we'll be talking about on our webinar. And again, we would love to have educators join us. PLP Pathways is a professional learning network that's designed to support educators across the state of Vermont as they work to implement Act 77. We'd like to also remind our viewers that on January 7th, 2017, the Middle Grades Collaborative is hosting their 10th annual Middle Grades Conference at the University of Vermont. You can go to the Middle Grades Collaborative website and register. They are also currently accepting registrations for the summer of 2017 Middle Grades Institute. We'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for supporting this program. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck out there in all your endeavors.